In the quiet seaside town of Stonehaven Bay, nestled on Jamaica's northern coast, where the rhythm of life moves with the tide, a storm was quietly building, one not of wind or water, but of blood, betrayal, and bureaucracy. Her name was Marisol Rivas, 21 years old. Sharp-minded, soft-spoken, and known to keep to herself, she wasn't the kind of woman who attracted attention. But in the final weeks of her life, Marisol made a noise no one in Stonehaven could ignore. She walked into the Stonehaven Bay Constabulary and did something few dared to do: she named names. She told them she was being followed. She told them she was being threatened. She gave them a name: Torian Briggs, a local man with a reputation as dark as the alleys he ruled. She begged them to take her seriously. But no one listened. A few weeks later, on April 5, just after dawn, a fisherman heading to the dock behind Mount Calvary Revival Chapel made a chilling discovery. Lying face down in the red clay, partially covered with brush and banana leaves, was the lifeless body of Marisol Rivas. She had been shot multiple times. No purse. No phone. Only a single broken fingernail clinging to her hand. The news shattered Stonehaven. But what made the horror unbearable was not just the brutality, it was the fact that she had warned them. That she had seen it coming. That the system, built to protect her, had done nothing at all. Within hours, whispers turned to rumors. And rumors turned to arrests. One by one, people began to talk. Hidden players emerged. Phones were tapped. Informants flipped. And in a town where silence often keeps people alive, the truth began to rise like heat off the asphalt. What followed was a case that peeled back the layers of corruption, fear, and systemic failure in one of Jamaica's overlooked communities. It revealed not just a murder, but a message. A message about who gets heard, who gets protected, and who gets left to die in the dirt. This is not just a story about crime. It's a story about inaction. About how a woman's voice echoed into silence. Until it was too late. Before we dive deeper into this chilling case, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that needs to be heard. Before her name became a headline, before her face was printed on the front page of the Stonehaven Chronicle, Marisol Rivas was just another young woman trying to outrun her past. Born and raised in the hills of St. Mary Parish, just outside Stonehaven Bay, Marisol grew up in a concrete home with peeling paint, a front porch shaded by overgrown breadfruit trees, and a mother who carried the weight of the world in her voice. Her father was never in the picture, disappeared when she was 3, some say gone to Kingston, others say gone for good. Either way, he left behind silence. Marisol learned early that silence was something you could survive in. She kept her head down in school, never caused trouble, never missed church. Teachers described her as quiet but clever. She read constantly, books on criminal law, poetry, psychology, and had a notebook filled with court case notes and clipped headlines from local murders, all annotated in her neat handwriting. Even as a teenager, Marisol knew there was something broken in the system. And part of her, deep down, wanted to fix it. But Stonehaven is not a place that rewards idealism. Not for women like her. When she was 16, Marisol left home under difficult circumstances. Rumors swirled of an incident with a family friend, though she never spoke publicly about it. For a while, she floated. Couch to couch. Friend to friend. She worked odd jobs, folding clothes at a dry cleaner, selling SIM cards on the roadside, sometimes taking night shifts at a bar that didn't ask too many questions. Through it all, she stayed out of trouble, stayed invisible. But invisibility, as she would learn, is not always safety. By 19, Marisol had moved into a rented backroom near Grovehill, a rough patch of Stonehaven Bay where people watched each other carefully and spoke in code. It was here she first crossed paths with Torian Briggs, a man she would later describe to police as the wrong kind of legend. Briggs wasn't just another street dealer, he was the kind of man whose name meant something in Stonehaven. Charismatic in public, violent in private, his reach extended through unofficial channels, side-pocket cops, debt-bound pastors, and women who never stopped looking over their shoulders. He ran numbers, moved product, and orchestrated fear like a conductor. And somewhere along the way, he took an interest in Marisol. No one knows exactly how it started. Some say she witnessed something. Others say she knew someone who owed him money. What's certain is that by late 2023, Marisol was afraid, paranoid, withdrawn, and making frequent visits to the police station on Harbor Lane. Her complaints were often dismissed as domestic issues or hearsay. One officer later testified, under oath, that she appeared hysterical and inconsistent. But her records tell a different story. Over the course of 3 months, Marisol filed 5 separate reports. Each more desperate than the last. He's watching me. He said he'd burn my house down. He has friends on the force. If I end up dead, check his phone. Those were her words. Written in her own hand. She even recorded one of their conversations, audio scratchy, voices muffled, but his threats unmistakable. She played it for the constable behind the desk. He nodded, promised to escalate it, and filed the report. Nothing happened. Meanwhile, Marisol tried to change her routine. She cut off contact with certain friends. She switched jobs. She avoided public transit, even when it cost her double. But paranoia can only protect you for so long in a town like Stonehaven. People watch. People whisper. And sometimes, they answer to other people. In March of 2024, a month before her murder, Marisol sent a voice note to a friend that would later surface during the investigation. Her voice was low, tired, measured. If anything happens to me, it's not random. It's not some robbery or mistake. He's serious. They're all serious. And nobody's listening. Nobody was. Not the police. Not the people she trusted. Not the system that promised her protection. The tragedy wasn't just that she died. It was that she knew she was going to die, and still, nothing was done to stop it. It was just past 6 a.m. on April 5, when a local fisherman named Clement Reed made his way down the narrow dirt path behind Mount Calvary Revival Chapel, a modest Pentecostal church tucked along the edge of the Grove Hill coast, where the jungle pressed up against rusted fencing and old barrels marked the boundary between the sacred and the forgotten. Clement had walked that same path nearly every morning for years, barefoot and carrying his weather-worn bucket and cast net. But that morning, he stopped short. What caught his eye first wasn't the body, it was the stillness. The birds weren't singing. Even the goats tied nearby seemed uneasy. And then he saw it. A dark figure lying face down in the brush, half covered in banana leaves, like someone had tried, but failed, to hide what they'd done. He dropped his bucket. At 6:22 a.m., the Stonehaven Bay Constabulary received a call from Clement's trembling voice. Within 20 minutes, officers arrived at the scene. By then, the sun had risen high enough to light up the church's back lot, and what they found sent a wave of disbelief through the responding unit. The body was a young woman. Face down. Partially decomposed. She wore a black tank top and jeans, both soaked in dried blood. Her feet were bare. Her wrists bore faint marks of restraint. A deep gash behind her left ear suggested blunt force trauma, though it was the bullet wounds in her back that confirmed the execution-style killing. 3 of them, tight grouping. There was no purse. No ID. No cell phone. Detective Ansel McCoy, who was among the first to arrive, later recalled the moment they turned the body over. "We recognized her face before we confirmed her name," he said. "We had seen her in the station. Heard her voice. She had come to us." The woman lying dead in the dirt was Marisol Rivas. The scene was cordoned off by mid-morning. Yellow tape flapped in the breeze as curious neighbors gathered behind makeshift barricades. Within hours, local media had swarmed the church, setting up cameras on tripods just beyond the police line. Headlines broke by noon. Young woman found dead in church backlit, possible foul play. What they didn't yet report was that the victim had previously filed multiple complaints that named a very real suspect, Torian Briggs. But those details were kept quiet. Forensics arrived around midday, combing the area for evidence. They found drag marks near the tree line, suggesting she hadn't been killed where she was found. There were traces of tire impressions along the eastern trail, a narrow dirt road leading out toward abandoned cane fields. No shell casings. No murder weapon. A thin silver earring was recovered nearby, snapped in two. A detail that would matter later. Back at headquarters, the station buzzed with quiet panic. Marisol's name was well known, not because she was famous, but because she was persistent. Officers flipped through her file. 5 written complaints. Audio recordings. 1 handwritten note stating, "I fear I won't make it to 22. Publicly, officials issued a standard press release. The Stonehaven Bay Constabulary is investigating the circumstances surrounding the death of a young woman found early this morning. At this time, no further details are available. But behind closed doors, the case was a powder keg. Everyone knew the optics, a vulnerable woman murdered after being ignored by the very people she turned to for help. If this case wasn't handled right, it wouldn't just be a murder investigation, it would be a scandal." Detective McCoy, known for being methodical and politically cautious, was assigned as lead investigator. His first move was to pull every report Marisol had filed. Then he called in her last known employer, a small salon on Market Lane, where co-workers described her as nervous lately and looking over her shoulder a lot. A former friend of Marisol's, who asked to remain anonymous, told investigators she had mentioned being watched in the days before her disappearance. She kept her curtains closed, wouldn't answer her door if it wasn't someone she knew. Said there was a car that kept parking across the street from her room. They tracked that car. It was a silver Toyota Axio, registered to a woman named Kelda Nunez, who was later revealed to have ties to Briggs' crew. That vehicle became a crucial lead. In the meantime, the autopsy was completed. Marisol had been dead approximately 36 to 48 hours before being found. Cause of death, gunshot wounds to the back. Evidence of restraint indicated she was held against her will for some period prior to death. There was bruising on her upper arms, and the pattern of injury suggested she had fought back. One chilling detail stood out. Under her fingernails, they found traces of skin, not her own. That would become vital later. As night fell over Stonehaven on April 5, people across the community lit candles on their porches. Not just in mourning, but in anger. Marisol had done everything she could to save her own life. And still, it hadn't been enough. Detective McCoy stood on the back steps of Mount Calvary Chapel that night, staring out at the place where her body had been found. In his hand was her final report, the one she filed 2 weeks before her death. "They know where I live," she had written. "They know I'm alone." The case was no longer about speculation. It was about accountability. And someone, maybe more than one, was going to have to answer for what happened. Detective Ansel McCoy didn't sleep the night Marisol Rivas's body was found. At his desk in the Stonehaven Bay Constabulary, beneath a single flickering bulb, he reviewed her final report again. It wasn't just the content that disturbed him, it was the tone. The handwriting trembled with urgency. Every word pointed to one name, Torian Briggs. Marisol hadn't merely feared Briggs. She had predicted he'd kill her. Still, this wasn't enough to bring him in. Not yet. They needed something solid, evidence that would hold up, not just in a courtroom, but under the intense scrutiny that would follow. This case wasn't quiet anymore. Journalists were circling. Civil rights groups were calling for accountability. McCoy felt the weight of the island's eyes on his shoulders. The first break came from the silver Toyota Axio. Surveillance footage from a petrol station in Grange Hills, just over a mile from where Marisol's body was found, showed the car pulling in at 2:47 a.m. on April 4, less than 36 hours before she was discovered. In the passenger seat, a woman matching Marisol's description. She wasn't moving. In the driver's seat, Kelda Nunez, already known to police as a low-level courier affiliated with Briggs's inner circle. She had never been violent, but she was loyal. Too loyal. Detectives flagged her immediately. They picked her up quietly 2 days later, under the pretense of questioning her about a separate traffic incident. What began as a routine interview quickly shifted into something else. When shown stills from the surveillance footage, Kelda's composure cracked. "I didn't know what they were going to do," she whispered. "I thought we were just supposed to scare her." That one line cracked the case wide open. Kelda claimed she had been asked by Briggs to deliver a message to Marisol, a warning to stop filing complaints, stop drawing attention. But something changed along the way. She admitted she had been instructed to pick Marisol up from her boarding house, under the guise of offering her a safe ride to a friend's place. Kelda had knocked, and Marisol, reluctantly, had come. They drove for 15 minutes. Then a second vehicle joined them. A dark blue Honda CR-V pulled up behind the Axio near an old sugar cane mill. Inside the Honda were two men, one of them, Kelda now claimed, was Briggs himself. "They took her," she told police. "I didn't see what happened after that. I swear. I left. I didn't want to be involved." But she already was. Within hours, McCoy secured an arrest warrant for Torian Briggs. He didn't wait. At dawn, the task force raided a gated property on Davenport Rise, a hillside enclave known for its tinted windows and long driveways. Briggs was found asleep in the back room, his phone tucked beneath his pillow. Inside the home, investigators found more than they expected. A burner phone, recently wiped. A stained jacket matching fibers recovered at the scene. A pair of sneakers with traces of blood spatter under the sole. The evidence was circumstantial, but overwhelming. Forensics later confirmed the blood belonged to Marisol. Briggs was placed under arrest at 5:41 a.m., April 8, 3 days after her body was found. News spread fast. Social media erupted. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered outside the station, some chanting, others weeping. But the story wasn't finished. During Briggs's interrogation, he denied everything. "I don't know that girl. I don't know what you're talking about," he repeated. He was calm, collected, like he'd rehearsed it. But behind the one-way mirror, McCoy watched closely. He wasn't looking for admissions. He was watching body language. Eye flickers. Pauses. And one detail stood out. Every time Marisol's name was mentioned, Briggs tapped his thumb against the table. An old tic from a gambling habit, McCoy would later learn. Subtle, but telling. Then came the second arrest. A forensics team recovered skin cells from beneath Marisol's fingernails. The DNA didn't match Briggs, it matched Kevin Palmer, a known enforcer in Briggs's network. Kevin had served time before, mostly minor assaults, drug-related offenses. But this was different. He was arrested 2 days after Briggs, found hiding at his cousin's house in Port Maria, nearly 40 miles away. Unlike Briggs, Kevin didn't hold up under questioning. He confessed, not to the murder, but to helping Briggs send a message. "We weren't supposed to kill her," he said. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." But it had. According to Kevin, things spiraled when Marisol fought back. She scratched him. Bit him. Spat in his face. She refused to be intimidated. That resistance, he claimed, made Briggs furious. And in that moment, everything changed. "Next thing I know," Kevin said, he pulled the gun. She was on the ground. He told me to shut up and drag her to the car. The confession stunned investigators. It was a brutal picture, raw, unfiltered, and heartbreakingly preventable. But one question still loomed: why? Why go to such lengths to silence Marisol? What was she threatening to expose? The answer lay buried in a series of phone records. In the days leading up to her death, Marisol had called a community journalist named Trevor Lindo, known for his exposés on police corruption and gang activity. Lindo had been working on a story that connected Briggs's operation to a local constable, an officer who had allegedly tipped Briggs off every time Marisol filed a report. That officer, Corporal Wayne Daly, quietly resigned the same day Briggs was arrested. No charges were filed against Daly. But the timing spoke volumes. Internally, the station was rattled. Rumors of a wider cover-up spread fast. McCoy, under pressure from above, was instructed to focus on the murder, not the politics. He ignored the order. Instead, he expanded the scope of the investigation, pulling years of complaints from women in the district. Patterns emerged: intimidation, threats, bribes. Names repeated. And often, those names led back to Briggs. In total, 5 people were eventually arrested in connection to Marisol's death. 3 would be charged. 2 would later plead out. Only one, Briggs, would face a murder trial. But the fight for justice was far from over. On the streets of Stonehaven Bay, murals began to appear, painted by anonymous hands, bearing Marisol's face and the words, "She warned us." McCoy visited the church where her body was found one more time, before the trial began. He stood at the edge of the lot, beneath the rustling palms, and closed his eyes. She wasn't just a victim, he would later say. She was a voice no one listened to, until it was too late. The trial of Torian Briggs began under heavy clouds, both literal and figurative. Rain fell steadily on the courthouse steps in Kingston as media trucks lined the avenue and protesters gathered with signs smeared from the storm: "Justice for Marisol," and "The Silence, Protect Our Daughters." The people of Jamaica were watching. It had taken 6 agonizing months to get here. Months of meticulous investigation, public pressure, and community mourning. The courtroom had become the crucible in which a nation's grief and fury would be measured against a system many feared would fail once more. Briggs, dressed in a sharply tailored gray suit, sat motionless at the defense table. He projected control, even indifference. But the tension in the room was palpable. Detectives, family members, journalists, no one moved carelessly. Every eye locked forward as the clerk called the first witness. Kelda Nunez took the stand. At only 21, she had already aged years beyond her time. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her voice was barely above a whisper. The prosecutor approached her gently, aware that she wasn't merely a witness, she was a former accomplice and a victim in her own right. She recounted the night she lured Marisol Rivas under false pretenses. Her testimony was harrowing. He said I had no choice. That it was either her or me. That I had to prove my loyalty. The courtroom fell silent. Her voice cracked but did not fail. She described how she drove Marisol to the abandoned church grounds in Stonehaven Bay. How Briggs and Kevin Palmer were already there. How things escalated far beyond what she was told. "I thought we were going to scare her. I didn't know they were going to kill her." The defense attempted to discredit her, pointing out her own plea deal and cooperation with police. But the damage had been done. The jury had seen the fear behind her eyes, and the shame clinging to every word. Kevin Palmer, shackled and flanked by guards, was next. A heavy-set man with calloused hands and a perpetually downcast gaze, Palmer had struck a plea deal in exchange for testimony. He was serving time, but this was his attempt at redemption. He did not flinch. He planned it. Briggs. It was him from the start. He said Marisol was a threat. That she had to disappear. Palmer's voice grew heavier as he described the final moments, the struggle, the screams, the silence afterward. She fought. Claude. Screamed his name. And he just kept going. Like she wasn't even human. The courtroom watched as the prosecution unveiled the physical evidence, fiber analysis from the car, GPS data from cell towers, a burner phone with deleted texts recovered through digital forensics. It built a timeline, cold and exacting. The noose around Briggs's neck tightened with every slide. But the most damning moment came with the introduction of a voicemail. It had been left by Marisol to her older sister the evening she vanished. The message was never received, her sister had changed numbers. The audio had sat on a voicemail server, forgotten, until investigators uncovered it during a digital sweep. Marisol's voice played through the speakers. If anything happens to me, it's Torian. It's Briggs. I just want you to know I tried. I really did. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Jurors turned away, some holding tissues. Even the judge leaned forward, visibly rattled. For the first time, Marisol's voice filled the courtroom, not as a victim, but as a witness from beyond. Briggs's defense attorney attempted to pivot, painting his client as the target of a conspiracy. He was, they argued, a successful businessman with political enemies. They dismissed the testimonies as the inventions of two scared, desperate young people looking for scapegoats. But the facts refused to bend. When it came time for closing arguments, the prosecution didn't deliver a fiery speech. Instead, the prosecutor held up Marisol's photo, the same one that had become a symbol for justice across the island, and said, "You know what happened. She told you herself." After 7 days of testimony and 2 tense hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom stood still. Briggs showed no emotion. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Conspiracy. Unlawful confinement. Obstruction. The sentencing came weeks later, but the outcome was already sealed. Briggs was given life in prison with no possibility of parole. Palmer received 18 years, with parole eligibility after 10. Kelda Nunez, whose cooperation had been critical, was sentenced to 4 years but would serve a reduced term in a rehabilitation-focused facility. As the gavel fell, Marisol's mother let out a quiet cry. The sound was not of triumph but release, a breath finally exhaled after months of agony. Detective McCoy stood outside the courthouse, watching the crowd disperse. He lit a cigarette, his first in over a year, and stared up at the overcast sky. There was no joy in his heart, only a muted sense of duty fulfilled. He drove back to Stonehaven Bay that night. The mural was still there. Brightened, repainted. Marisol's face, eyes open, not in fear but defiance. Beneath it, fresh flowers had been laid. A small card read, "We remember. We rise." McCoy touched the paint-slicked wall, fingers tracing the lines of her face. He had delivered justice. But justice, he knew, was never enough. Not when it came too late. Marisol Rivas had been silenced in life, but in death, she had sparked a reckoning. And that reckoning was only just beginning.